Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Activities for People Living at Home with Dementia. We are proud to offer this series with funding from the Area Agency on Aging and the United Way of Tarrant County. These programs are recorded, except for Texas Winds, and are made available for viewing through a YouTube channel for future use. I am Martha Brown, your host for today's activities, and I am going to introduce right now the Fort Worth Museum of Science and History, Kirsty and Caleb with Bethany behind the camera. And I don't know what they're bringing us, but it must be interesting. I'm turning it over to the pros. Y'all have at it.
All right, thanks. Well, welcome everybody. So today, originally, we were going to bring some of our favorite things, but that kind of turned into just some of my favorite things because Kirsty and Lee didn't get around to it. So I brought a couple of flags, although I just have one laid out right now. We're actually going to work on putting them in the museum a little bit later. And then I brought some of my favorite swords from the collections as well. So yes, Bethany, if you want to zoom down, we'll start with the flag. There we go. All right. So most of you will probably recognize this is the American flag. However, this one has 45 stars on it instead of 50.
Oh, really?
And so this flag flew for the US for about 12 years between 1896 and 1908. Yes, that equals 12. Really interesting thing about US flags is that they are never made obsolete. So this one could still be flown by an embassy or anything official still. So even though it doesn't have the correct number of stars on it. Now,
It still has a job.
I had no idea that that was the truth.
yes. Another interesting thing is until 1912, so 4 years after this flag was made, the stars on here, they could be in any shape that the flag designer wanted it to be in. So that's why sometimes you'll see the circle, you'll see other interesting formations like stars made out of the stars. And so it wasn't until 1912 that they decided on rows of stars for it as well. This one has 13.
So you're talking about it's like it could be a cluster of
Yes,
different stars,
exactly.
but then it was like at that time it had where it was in rows
Yes,
of stars.
and it's changed.
Okay.
They've had to do presidential orders afterwards when they've added new stars in to change the number of rows. But until that time, you'll see stars, weird little squares with other stars on the outliers. You just did some really interesting ones. I definitely encourage you to look them up.
Caleb, did you say there's a presidential order when they changed the star configuration?
Yes. So 1912 under Taft, I believe it was, he made it official that they were going to be in certain rows. And then when the flags changed again under Roosevelt and who would have been whoever was president whenever Hawaii and Alaska became countries or states, they changed it again to have the rows then. So there's actually been several flag acts throughout the US history. The first one was taken by the Second Continental Congress, and that's where they said we want to have 13 stripes and 13 stars on the flag. But that's all they said. And so it's kind of up in the air who actually designed the flag originally.
Up in the air.
Yeah. But that's the original one. And then in 1795, they had to change it again because they started adding a stripe and a star every time there was a new state. So we actually have flags that had 15 stars and 15 stripes as two new states were in. But then, as I'm sure you could guess, they were worried about it getting way too crowded as they kept adding on new states.
It wouldn't fit in this room.
Yeah. So in 1795, they said, no more, we're just sticking at 15 and 15. And then in 1818, they passed another flag act that said, okay, 13 stripes for the 13 colonies, and then we'll add a star for each new state. So that's how we got the 13 stripes and the stars for each state eventually. Yes. Another interesting thing, I wish I could bring you this flag that we have, but it was not in good condition. But there are American flags out there that have wrong numbers of stars. So the way that they decide that stars are going to be on the flag is the cutoff is July 4th every year. So if you became a state before that year, you would have a star added onto it. So in the 1800s, when they were adding states like crazy, flag makers didn't want to be left behind. And so they would start speculating on how many stars they would need to start putting on their flags. And so the best case example, and the one that we have, is a 42-star flag. But a 42-star flag was never an official flag because just before the July 4th cutout date, a new state was added and it jumped up to 43 all of a sudden. So every now and then you'll find 42-star flags, but that's not an official US flag or anything. So just kind of a very unique piece of Americana with that.
That's like a misprint at the mint for a coin.
Exactly, yes. And so they're super rare. I say they're super rare. They're pretty rare and pretty highly valued. Again, I wish I could have brought that one, but ours just was not in the greatest of shapes.
It wouldn't have traveled well.
No, it definitely would not. So yes.
Yeah.
Some of you, I'm guessing y'all remember when the 50th star was added with Hawaii with Hawaii. That would have been about 1960.
I was too young.
Yeah,
We were all too young, weren't we?
Okay.
Yes, too young.
Too
Way
young
too
for that.
young for this group.
Great.
Tell us when.
That was 1960, I believe. So Hawaii became a state July 27th, 1959. But because it missed the cutoff date of July 4th, there was 1 year where we had a 49-star flag, but 50 states.
Eisenhower was president.
Eisenhower. Okay. I was guessing it was him, but I also wanted to say Truman.
Eisenhower, yeah.
So
Cool.
yeah. So that's this flag. And then shifting totally away from flags or any sort of relevance, I've brought some of my favorite swords. So this one is, whoop. There we go. This one is very interesting. The waved bladed.
Different.
Well, that could do some damage.
Yeah. So this is from the Philippines. Now the design of it originally came from Indonesia. The swords that this is based off of are called Chris swords. And they developed around the 1500s or so. They have this wave style, although not all of them do. It just depends on the maker if they have waves and how many they do. And in Indonesia, the Chris swords took on a very spiritual aspect, a very ceremonial aspect. It was kind of a piece that you would pass down through the generations.
Like an heirloom?
Like an heirloom, yes, exactly. But this is a little bit different. So this is from the Philippines. And so throughout time, the style of the Chris traveled north from Indonesia to the Philippines. And that's where you get this. And so this is actually called a callus, which is more of a sword than it is a knife. It kind of goes back and forth on what is, if a Chris is a sword or a knife. But
Does it depend on the size of the person?
right, yes. And so the main difference is that this is very much a slashing weapon used for that. And you can tell by the shape of the handle, it's pretty straightforward. Whereas with,
Oh, thank you.
yes. Whereas with the Chris, you'll have more of like a rifle or a pistol handle. So it'll curve down more and it's more for stabbing. But this one is also particularly interesting. So this dates from about 1898, which for those of you who know your American history, know that that's when the US took over the Philippines during the Spanish-American War. So we're pretty sure that this sword came from a gentleman who served in the Philippines during that war and brought it back to his family. So that's a pretty kind of interesting provenance story. Yes, interesting story about this blade. Now this one, as nice as it looks, is not nearly as ornate as some of them come.
1898.
Because Chris swords, because they are so highly prized and as an heirloom, they'll get damaged, but instead of just throwing them away, they repair them with like gold and gilding and things like that. So you get these very ornate blades. Typically the older and more used they are. Yeah, it's kind of comparable to that, to the Japanese. I forget what it's called with the gold,
It's like kintsugi.
something like that.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert to be saying anything about it, but
Almost like kitsune, but that's a Japanese spirit, not pottery.
no. So yeah, that's most I have about this sword.
How do you spell Chris to be sure I'm understanding the word right?
K-R-I-S, and might also be pronounced crease.
Okay,
Um,
thank you.
And this would be called a callus, so K-A-L-I-S. And you can look up and research the difference between the two of them. I'm not sure if I totally understand those, but it's an interesting kind of comparison. Yes. Well, this one is definitely a sword,
Yeah.
for sure. But we have others in the collection that I almost brought one, and it's maybe about that thin around and that tall or so. So super, super short and small. And that's more of a typical ceremonial blade, whereas this one was probably
Used in action.
in action. Yes.
Yep.
Du-du-du. Yes. Yep. So we'll put that back. Yep.
Okay.
Yes, please. Okay, and so then staying in East Asia, although we're
Wow.
quite a ways, we have a couple of Japanese swords here. Okay, yes. So these date from anywhere between the 1600s to mid 1800s. During that period, it's called the Edo period, or the shogunate. The
Shogun.
Tokugawa shogunate.
Yes.
That's it.
Tried to help. Didn't know that much.
Which was a time when Japan, for the most part, was really stable. They had a strong government, and the duties of the samurai became more ritualistic. So it's questionable whether or not these swords were actually used or not. But I love this because during that time period, they were worn with two swords. It was called, I forgot the word, but it was a word that translates to swords, basically. You'd have the short sword like this one, and a long sword. So this short sword is called a wakizashi. The short dagger, typically if you're going to an important lord's house or something like that, this is what you would wear. You would leave your larger blade at the door and bring this one in. This other one is what y'all might be more familiar with. It's a katana. Yes, there we go.
Yeah, it's a bit longer than the frame.
Yes.
That looks like the sword from The Bodyguard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Last Samurai too. That's right
Yes.
there. Or Kill Bill.
Ooh.
Trying to think of other samurai. What's a Kill Bill?
Or 47 Ronin.
47 round. Yeah. So these two are kind of interesting to me because I'm not sure if how original they are or not. So if we can zoom in on this, please. You will see that
Oh,
both of these, well, both are show
Okay.
it.
Yeah.
What?
Whoa.
First, Bethany, what are you doing?
Okay, well, we won't move. You
Bear with
can-
us. Okay.
There we go.
Yes. So the hilt is very traditionally made. And if you can see this kind of rough stuff in there, that's manta ray skin, which was the traditional wrapping for it. And there's a little token inside as well for good luck. And then it's wrapped in this soap, which is very typical of that time period.
Let me see. Oh, this one too.
Yeah, you can see it on the katana as well. So that seems just about accurate. However, on the katana, we'll pull out, the blade itself looks very normal. But typically during that time period, they had a very unique way of forging swords that would cause the blade of it to be a lot sharper than the backside of it, or a lot harder. And so because of the way they forged it, you get this kind of black markings along the edge of it. And as you can see, this one doesn't have it. Now it's possible that this just isn't polished well enough, and so you can't see it. I don't know if the blade is real. The one surefire way to tell would be to remove the handle. And typically, if you were a Japanese sword maker, you would you would sign your name on what's called, I believe, the tang of the sword right here that goes into it. So if we wanted to tell, we'd have to pop off the hilt and then see. And in theory, it should be on this side. Yes, because typically they would wear them with the blade facing up, and then the name would be on the inside. Yeah, there you go. So yes, there you go.
Okay. I'm sure we don't stab me now, 'cause
Yeah, we're gonna try to avoid that.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Okay.
that's the main stuff we've brought to show. Do y'all have any questions? Or I know I talked a lot.
Oh, did you show this, the design on this one?
Nope.
Because there's no design on that one.
Yeah.
What's the cover in your hand right now? What is that cover made of? Because that's not the blade, right?
Right. It's
Correct.
the sheath. It's some sort of lacquered wood.
I don't think that shows.
I don't think it's bamboo.
It smells.
You'd think it'd have to be really strong to put up with being right next to a really sharp blade.
Yes.
What do you mean? It smells more like bamboo though. The inside of it. does.
Yes. Although these blades themselves aren't exactly the sort of chopping kind, so different blades are used in the different types of edge that you put on the blade is meant for different types of work. And so these blades, you probably wouldn't have to worry too much about cutting through the wood.
Let's see. It's like, can y'all see that
Oh,
on this hilt? It actually has.
Ornamentation.
that lets the dirt through.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's also some, I don't know if we can get closer in on it, but
How would they carry these in battle? Would it be crossbody or behind them or on their side, or do you know?
On their hip, typically with the short blade on top and the longer blade on bottom. So typically a katana is a two-handed sword. However, during this time period, there's a specific, and I don't remember what it's called, there was a specific form of sword fighting that was developed by a samurai where you would draw both blades in battle and use them two-handed. But typically, the dagger would be the backup for it.
Do you have any idea what kind of uniforms these people would wear when they go into battle with a sword such as this?
So we actually have a collection of samurai armor in our collection. It's just not easy to move. It's very heavy, as I'm sure you can imagine. It is extremely involved.
Photographs, perhaps?
What?
Photographs, perhaps?
We can work on it. We should have photographs of it somewhere.
we also had it displayed when we had our 75th
Yes.
anniversary exhibit here.
Yes.
in 2016?
Somewhere. It was before my time.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they do have we have the typical kind of looking samurai sword that's flat and sticks out on the back. It's made out of leather and some sort of, I'm guessing, iron.
Mhm.
There's a golden dragonfly that sits on top of it as well. That's kind of ornamentation. And then underneath you'd have a very heavy silk padded robe essentially. And then on top of that you'd have, there's a leather and like metal backed breastplate, male sleeves, as well as gauntlets, shin guards.
Yeah. There's a lot of like hard leather, and then you would have the silk. Almost like the first layer would kind of be more of like a kimono. If you like, if anyone has ever worn those or seen those, is like you would have the gentleman's kimono and it would overlay. So that would be like the first layer. Then you would have like a thicker, not necessarily wool, but that would be like extra padding. I sometimes think about it's like when like football players are putting on padding, it's like they have on like their undershirt and then they have other clothing to go with it, but then it's like you do have kind of like your shoulder pads that are more of a bigger square as
Mhm.
opposed to like it's a coned or ovaled onto your shoulder pads.
Mhm.
So it's like you had several different plates. It also makes me think of a roof and like how those shingles are kind of layered.
Mhm.
So it's like
Mhm.
samurais very involved
Yes.
in all the different layers that they would put on.
Yes, it's very much a matter of both protection as well as maneuverability.
Mhm.
Um,
Gotta be able to move.
They're
Yes.
known for their layering, aren't they? The Asian.
Typically, yes, you don't find quite the like heavy duty metal armor that you get in medieval Europe over there. It's a little bit more flexible, a little bit more layered and inlaid. Although
Mhm.
surprisingly, the metal armor that you do find in medieval Europe is still very flexible and easy to move around. It's doesn't look like it would be, but I mean, you can still run in it and jump and roll.
You'd have to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry, you probably said this and my brain missed it. What time period were those swords from?
Those two swords date from anywhere between like 1683 and 1856, around that time period.
Okay.
So that's that time period called the Edo period. Edo is the old name for Tokyo, meaning East capital. And that's when the government of Japan moved from their traditional home in Kyoto to Tokyo. And so that's why Tokyo is the capital of it today as well.
Caleb, I'm really curious as to what in your life draws you to loving these as wanting to share them with us.
I don't know. Honestly, I think it was just a generic, I love stories
Uh-huh.
and I love things that are unfamiliar to me. And I love learning about different perspectives and different ways of life. And so what's more foreign to where I am than the opposite side of the world, basically.
Mhm.
Tie that in with a dad that loves World War II and growing up learning about World War II. And so just learning about that and the Pacific, and then how that's just naturally carried on as well.
Mhm. Are you a traveler, Caleb?
Some, and what I lived in England for a year or so when I did my master's, and I've traveled over Europe. I've never been anywhere else outside of Europe and US.
And your master's is in what?
Museum studies and cultural heritage.
Well, of course.
Yep.
Of course.
That's how I got here.
We have the 11:30 and the 1:30 groups today. Will you be showing these items for all three groups?
Yes, ma'am. That's the plan.
Awesome. Okay. I know we're going to have y'all back some more. Do you have any idea about what you're going to have for next time? Whose favorites are you going to show next time?
In theory, it should be Kirsty or Lee's favorite things, since this is my favorite things. We've also talked about doing postcards.
Yes.
We have a lot of cool postcards from around the world.
I would need to double check, but it's like I'm pretty sure most of the postcards that we have taken or that have either been given to us or donated, most of them are to Texas residents. So it's like whoever was sending a postcard was sending it to a friend or family member who lived in Texas at the time, or it was someone who lived in Texas themselves and they sent it to either an admirer or a family member. So it has Texas ties, but there are some that are like from California, a few that are from Japan. There's quite a few. And I'm very much a person that loves to write letters and receive letters. So it's like, I love our postcard collection.
Mhm.
I also from time to time will bug my grandmother about her postcard collection, but it's postcards are something that is interesting, that you can kind of take a peek into a person's thought process, into what's going on in their life. And then you can see how, whether it was sentiment or if they were like, just like, I'm sorry that I missed you, or I'm sorry that either someone has passed away, or congratulating that someone has been married. It's like you see how that traveled across the country and you see that their story still lives on through the letter.
Mhm. Mhm.
So hopefully we'll be able to bring that to you next time.
Good, good. Do you have a section of Fort Worth pictures postcards?
Um,
We would have to check. I don't know if we have a whole lot from Fort Worth. I think it might be more people sending it back to Fort Worth.
mhm.
Okay,
Because typically our archive collection comes from people who lived in Fort Worth.
yes.
But we might have a few. I know we have some pictures from around Fort Worth.
Yeah.
It would just be,
I almost said Causeway. That's not here. That's in there.
I'm specifically asking because we have an unofficial photographer of Fort Worth, Brian Lunser. Do y'all know him? Lunser.
the last name sounds familiar.
Yeah.
He walks around Fort Worth taking pictures, and when the art museums come and they do the in the street art and parades and holidays and Christmas lights and when the tree goes up and that kind of thing. And he's trying to put together a book of postcards from the olden days in Fort Worth and then taking brand new pictures of the same
Okay.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
spots so that he can put them side by side or overlay them.
Yeah,
you
like
can
how it's
see-
progressed from time.
Yes, the old and the new.
Oh, okay.
If you have any, he would love to see them or maybe take pictures of them and use them. And you might even get an atta-girl or an attaboy in his book.
Okay.
Write his
Oh,
name
well-
down.
We'll definitely
Yeah.
check it out and look for
Yeah.
those.
Okay.
First
Okay.
name's Brian.
Brian
Okay.
Lunser.
Okay. Lunser. Okay.
I
Okay.
think it's Lunser.
Brian Lunser.
And he lives in one of the towers. So he has a perfect,
View.
He's the one that takes up the weather sometimes, right?
yes,
From up
Oh
there.
yeah, I think I've seen that.
yes.
Yeah.
If you get on Facebook at all, when I see his stuff, I always repost it.
Yes, I think I have.
Been chatting away. Do any of y'all have any questions? I've been monopolizing the conversation.
Mm-mm.
We're happy. I like happy campers. Well, we want to thank Kirsty and Caleb and behind the scenes Bethany with the camera today. And we look forward to seeing you later. And while you're resting, I'm going to show our crew what's coming up.
All right.
Thank you, folks.
All right.
We
Guys.
appreciate
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yes.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, today is the Fort Worth Museum of Science and History. Tomorrow is Wednesday, the 16th, and we are bringing back Peggy Spear with sports. Because of the Super Bowl, I'm sure she's bringing some of the Amon Carter Museum of American Art to us.
Okay. Good.
Yes. Anybody have anything they want to share today?
Not that I can think of.
I love it. You all look happy and healthy, and that's the way I like to see you. Yes?
Yes,
Y'all take care of each other and have a wonderful day.
you do
Thank
the
you.
same.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.